Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have theologian and Bible scholar, author, and speaker, Amy Seiffert. Amy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me. I don't know if I would say scholar, but thank you. I appreciate it.
Listen, I did see that you're in seminary, right? You're going to seminary at Denver.
Yes.
You're with that incredible. Listen, I've never wanted to be in a seminary class more than the group that you have in this that are gathered. So Jamie Nato was on the podcast not too long ago, and she's in that group, right?
She's in that group, and she is hilarious. She's like the class clown. Yeah, this group is phenomenal, and they are visionaries, and they're doing stuff for Jesus, and I don't really know how I wound up there, but man, I'm going to get an A in community, if nothing else.
I mean, what an incredible group of leaders and just people who I think are putting incredible theological thoughts out in the world. So I'm super excited. It's one of those things where it's like I'm kind of just tracking it from a distance, not in the creepy way, but in just kind of like the intriguing way. Yeah. You've done a lot of things over the years. I kind of always like to start off with kind of a big macro question, which is, how would you describe the calling that God has placed on your life?
Yes, that's a great question. I would say I can trace this back to when I was in the third grade. Really the desire to communicate and teach. And I didn't even know what that meant. I thought it meant in a classroom with elementary school kids. And so I pursued that. But the more that unfolded, as God does, I realized, like after I became a believer and started opening the Word for the first time when I was 16, I was like, I want to teach this. I don't even know what this Bible is, but I want to teach it because so that's been unfolding, communicating and teaching. And really, once I grab onto something, I want to share it with others.
I deeply appreciate your teaching method, and it's both personal and it's done with a lot of grace, and you clearly spend a ton of time studying the text. In your book, Starved, one of the things that you do is you talk about your son's Crohn's disease that was diagnosed in 2018, and we'll get into a lot of that. But I think that there's a lot of leaders listening who want to teach from their personal stories. How do you know when it's time to use a story in your teaching versus keeping a story private?
Oh, that is the great question that we all wrestle with. I've learned the hard way. I have shared some things before that I hadn't quite found the depth of healing I needed yet. And so I was still kind of bleeding on the page, if you will, about it. And so I really try to ask the Spirit, is this for others now, or is this still just you and me? And just trying to listen. This story, and I try to share with one or two closer to me before I'm on a stage with a microphone to see, is this speaking to others? Do others find encouragement and help from this or not? So it is such a dance, and it's such a time of listening from God of, is this, do I keep it close, or do I put it out there as well? If it doesn't involve me specifically, like if it involves my kids, they have gotten to an age I ask permission to share. Like, hey, I had to sit down with my son and say, this book came out of your diagnosis. How do you feel about me sharing your life that will be in print forever? How's it sit for you? And just talking about that, and even just little stories I've shared. And I've shared about my kids at different points and in a sermon. And afterwards, one child has been like, why'd you do that? Why am I embarrassed by that? So, oh my gosh, I didn't know. So I've learned a lot as a mom who is also a preacher, what is fair game and what's not, and to not laugh at my kids at their expense unless they're ready for it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious. So Robbie is the one who was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. And so, Robbie's diagnosis had to have been hard and just and yet it becomes this metaphor for the entire context of the book. And you kind of run it there. How did you how did God reveal to you that you could take this moment in time, this horrendous moment in time where, I mean, the anxiety about watching your son lose weight and just kind of the way you tell the story in the book is beautiful and just like, but also heart-wrenching. And so how did God say, no, you should use this to encourage other people to evaluate what they're consuming in my name?
Yes. Well, he hit me with it in my kitchen when I was unloading everything with Robbie's diet. I remember we were just taking literally everything out of our pantry and looking at it to see what's in these spices. What is there some sort of sneaky yeast or maltodextrin? And we're just turning everything around. I mean, my kitchen was a wreck. Everything was out, and I was so overwhelmed. I feel like the Lord just quietly, it's always real quiet and gentle, not like me, but he was like, hey, you might need a spiritual diet change. Like, you are anxious, you are overwhelmed. You have put this whole weight on you to fix your son's diet. Like, can you come to me in the quiet? And but that was for me and God for quite some time, to just even learn a new way of coming to God as the shepherd, to shepherd me through. And so that came out in different ways, different little posts that slowly developed to, man, I think our culture might need a spiritual diet change. And the church as well as the greater culture. And so it just kind of in pieces came until I was really able to write it out, verbalize it, process it with some close friends. Does this hit with you, this idea of a spiritual diet change? You know, just kind of trying it out. But yeah, it was a slow chat with the shepherd before I could put it out there.
I appreciate the intimacy that you have with God, and I think a lot of people crave that intimacy. And there's leaders listening who are super busy, like you. They're moms and dads, and they're working, and they've got all the things. How do you create that intentional intimacy with the Lord on a daily basis?
Oh, I'm not good at it. I need to practice just as much as everybody. I like noise and loud and ding. So it's a good question, because I wrote Starve just as much for me as anybody else. My favorite practice truly is, it's real chill. It's 5 minutes of silence a day, which, you know, some of your leaders listening might be like, 5 minutes, what's that going to do? But I'll tell you, the first 4 minutes of my first 5 minutes of silence that I practiced years ago was really painful, because I was out of silence shape, if you will, and didn't know how to do it. And it's so good for me, because I tend to want to push and prove and produce for my worth. And sitting, doing nothing, letting myself be loved, that heals so many things. And often the 5 minutes gets a little bit longer if I've got that time, but that helps me often kind of recenter on who God is and sends me in a different direction. I try to do it midday, actually, before my kids come home from school. So I work from home, and they bust through the doors between 2:30 and 4 at different times. And so around 2, I think, okay, it's about to go from quiet to chaos, and what are we going to do here? And so it's simple. And I'll tell you what, Tony, it's not like God speaks to me profoundly all the time. Sometimes there's nothing and it's just silent and it's good. But sometimes there's a word or a scripture, or I watch a bird outside and I'm reminded of Matthew 6, that God provides for them and he's going to provide for me. So yeah, that's been really helpful.
I wondered, and I could be off here. It felt like as I was reading the beginning of the book, and you listed Isaiah 51 out, I think 55, Isaiah 55
yeah.
out. Did that come from the Lord? Because it felt kind of divinely placed. I would be interested to hear the story about how you came to that. As I read it, I was like, oh, this has got some juice on it.
Yes. You know what? I have loved Isaiah forever, and I do not understand Isaiah. I can't wait to learn more from Denver Seminary on Isaiah, because it's bananas to me. But there are different points of Isaiah that I've just been drawn to for years. And Isaiah 55 I mean, I'm talking for like a decade. I've always thought, man, his shout, God's shout to come, even if you have no money, come and buy, which is really strange. So who's paying for the food? Oh, God is right there, standing there paying for us and our food. And even there in Isaiah, when there's, they're in captivity. But when I read it in the Message for the first time, I was like, all right, Eugene Peterson. He was like, why do you spend your money on spiritual junk food, on cotton candy that won't satisfy? I was like, oh, okay. That's literally what
good.
I'm doing.
Right.
It's so good. Right. And literally we had to swap sugar for honey for Robbie's diet. They can't have sugar. The only sweetener is honey. And just thinking cotton candy for honey. What does that look like in our lives on a daily basis? But yeah, Isaiah 55 has just been an anchor. It's so deep. Come eat, live. That's the call. I don't know. I can't get over it.
How do you decide? I mean, you do your Bible Minute with Amy, which I love, on your Instagram, and if you don't follow her on Instagram, you should. It's really good content that you're putting out there regularly. How do you decide what verses to share? That content. Take me into the creative process of someone who's writing a lot of content, and I mean, you're constantly putting out stuff either for YouVersion or yourself, or teaching at your local church, or like, how does that work in your brain?
I know. What a good question. I just told this to my husband. I was like, I think I'm empty. I don't have anything more. I think I'm done. Like I get all dramatic. Like I've poured it all out. And he looks at me, he's like, I bet not. I bet. So there's points where I feel like I got nothing. And at other points, it really comes from reading the word. If I'm reading and I'm just sitting there and whatever I'm reading, sometimes I think, I like the challenge of reading a passage and thinking, if I had 1 minute of someone's attention, that our attention is so distracted and terrible. If I had 1 minute with somebody, say on Instagram, what would I want them to know from this passage? Could I distill it in a creative way that would make them stop and think, I haven't seen God that way, or Jesus, or whatever, or myself. And so then my brain starts rolling. So I like the challenge of taking a big thought down to something small that my friend Cassie would I have somebody in my head that would feel like, okay, that hit me. So it comes from my reading or conversations with my friends. I'll start sharing a thing. And if they say something, I'm like, oh, I'm going to need to think about that. And just FYI, I might use that to share. So everybody knows.
Are you a notes in the phone kind of gal,
yes.
or are you more of a journal, or
notes in my phone, writing notes in my phone? I actually have a little note in my phone, like Bible Minute thoughts. But yeah, there are moments where I'm like, I don't know. And I have prayed. Is there anything? I try to pray regularly. It's so funny. I've gotten some pushback on like having an Instagram ministry. And I'm like, you know what? That's where people are. And that's right. Okay. And I'm going to put goodness into this platform that could, there's all kinds of crazy thing down there. And so I have prayed, like, God, is there something you want me to put on the gram that who's going to see it? And then sometimes something comes, sometimes nothing. And I just keep looking at the grass and walking. But just really trying to bring, invite God into this, because I think it matters. Yeah, I think people are hungry to understand God's word in a fresh way.
I think one of the most important practices for leaders is writing. Do you have, whether that just be emails or, sermons or whatever, papers? I just think writing clarifies our thoughts. Do you have, like, when you're in book writing mode for like Starved, or I don't know if you're writing one currently.
I am.
I figured. I was hoping a teaser. But yeah. Do you have a process?
Yes. I'm going to say a loose process. And then, man, I've joked about this too. The phone has its blessings and its curses, but I'll tell you, I end up writing on my phone, like in the car line. Well, I got 10 minutes and I'm like putting a paragraph in. So I like the idea of sitting in the woods at a computer all serene for hours but often it's on the fly. I don't know if that's how I'm built or I'm a product of our culture, or a combination of the two, but to just really harness those thoughts really quickly and write those down. But I do try to write every day, and sometimes I have to write every day to meet a deadline.
Yeah.
So that's a discipline that's been built into my life. But I am I was an English major, so writing, I love it.
I was curious one of the things I like to do when I'm doing what I call a podcast read for the book, right? Which is where I've kind of read the book, but I don't read it like for my own personal thing. I read it kind of abstractly to see what I can pull. And one of the things I noticed is that there's 14 different chapters in the book Starved, right? And the first 3 are about what you're starved by, and then the last 11 are what you're starved for. When you create that as a writer, do you start from the top down? Like, are you looking at the long-term picture, or is it more like just a chapter at a time, not knowing what's next?
These are great questions. I love talking about this stuff.
Me too.
So great. I'll kind of word vomit, what is it called? Like a
Brainstorm
or a word cloud situation, but put all the different things that we're starving, that are starving us, we're starving for, by, and I put them all on a piece of paper in front of me, and then I put them on note cards, and I ended up, at first I think I had 20, and then I was like weeding them out because I'm like, that's too many. And then starting to make that linear storyline too, that can run through it. And many people were like, you started with Robbie and you made us wait till the very end. Like, how's he doing? I'm like, I know we had to travel that road, but so I definitely laid it out. The note cards are huge for me because I can see them visually with the chapters, and then also move them around to say, like, what do people need to hear when it comes to how I lay this book out? And what gentle voice needs to come before maybe hitting with a harder challenge. So thinking about tone and voice as well as storyline. And my publishers are so helpful with this too. They have an eye for how a book can lay out. So man, it is a group project in the truest form.
Well, one of the things that's clear as I've gotten to know your story a little bit in preparation for all of this is that you have led groups of people for your entire ministry, kind of starting at Crew and what you did at Bowling Green, and then even to now, right? You're constantly leading people. I was curious, as someone who's never been in your shoes as a female leader in a predominantly male world, what has that experience been like for you, and how do you live in that tension that has to be there?
You are so great. Thanks for even observing and noticing that. Yes, it is a male space. It's been quite a journey. And I even share some of that in Star from being told when I was a senior in college, I was paired up with another guy to co-lead a group together on campus. We were doing sororities and fraternities.
And he had
Bible
you bring
studies.
the brownies, right?
Yes. And it took me a minute. Yes. I came to our meeting like, hey, these are the things I want to teach. I think we could teach together. And he, said, hey, you know what? I was thinking, I'll take care of the Bible study part. What if you could just bring like the brownies? And it wasn't like some brownies. It was like as if we needed them. And then I was the girl for the job, so it just was this moment. It was a pretty defining moment. I will say though, I did take that conversation to the crew, the crew staff at the time. And they were like, oh, no, we're going to make sure you bring the word. And just really advocated for both men and women to be teaching, which was really beautiful. But yeah, there's been these moments where I feel like one of these things is not like the other, walking into different spaces. And just a couple of years ago, I was invited by my pastor to come into a conference, and there were only about 40 pastors, but it was all male. I was one of 2 women in the room. And of course I noticed right away, I walk in, I'm trying to see, like everybody does, who's like me here? Do I fit? Mm-hmm. Do I belong? And the one other woman in the room was And she was fantastic at it, but she was making the whole thing work. She was bringing out the bagels. She was putting coffee together. There wasn't another female that was like, I'm here to brainstorm outreach and evangelism and thinking through our community connection to our culture. And it became that 2 days really by the curiosity of the pastors. But it started with a pastor saying to me in the taco bar line, like, hey, how did you get here? And it was kind and sweet, but it was just do you mean like, where was I born? Like, did I come by plane? Like, how did I get in there? Just being funny, but I understood his question. And so what I loved is them asking, I think I present I think having a side-by-side nature of men and women leading together is a beautiful representation of what we've seen in the garden. We are both image bearers, both blessed together, both side by side, before the fall, So I think, at points I've been frustrated to God and thought, why do I feel like I have to pioneer these spaces? But he's been faithful. He's like, I go before you. Like, it's not you pioneering. I'm going before you. I've got the hatchet. I'm making a path. Follow me through.
I know that there's a lot of male leaders who are listening right now. I wonder if you could give them one or two things that they could do to help promote that side-by-side mentality. Like what were one or two things that you wish somebody would have done for you, or maybe I think Pastor Steve may have done for you, or
yes.
like kind of what can, help us. What can we do better?
I love your heart posture. Thank you. I would say set more chairs out for women and invite them to whatever table you're at. And if your church isn't designed to do that, get creative. Like if your church is all male elders, say, invite women into a different meeting with them. And I think we're emaciated in hearing women's voices, the church is emaciated. So get creative with getting women at the table. And then if I may recommend, I would say if you could read one book, it is Emboldened by Pastor Tara Beth Leach. My husband read it. And when he was done, it's not long. And he said, I want to be an emboldened man who emboldens women. And I just kind of caught the view for making sure women can lead and use their gifts. And so just a couple of thoughts.
No, I appreciate that. I know that a lot of my podcast family will as well. It's interesting, right? Because I think oftentimes we don't even realize where we are with it. I didn't realize the inequality and diversity in podcasting until publicists started sending me books, and I realized the white male to everyone else ratio. Like it's just a wild scenario. Like it's, I don't know, right? Like, and just constantly trying to battle against that. It does transition nicely into the idea of a spiritual diet, because I think a lot of people don't know that they're eating junk food.
Yes.
How do we gain that awareness without having Crohn's disease, right? Like, or ripping apart our spiritual kitchens. Like, how do we do that internal spiritual audit of where we are?
That's a good question. I ended up thinking about this as I was writing and what would help people figure out where they are and what nourishment they need. And I put together the acronym OAT, O-A-T. Am I O for overwhelmed? Do I feel overwhelmed? Do I feel anxious is the A, or do I feel tired? And I would just say, ask yourself, where am I overwhelmed, anxious, or tired? And really take a minute and maybe journal those thoughts out. Am I overwhelmed by what other people think of me? or what I feel like I need to produce to be loved. What is the overwhelm here? What am I anxious about? What's in front of me? What's going on in my job, in my world, in my leadership? And what do I feel tired about? And I think if we could start to identify where we feel malnourished in our soul, we can start to ask God, what now? How do I find nourishment in the places that are starving my soul? How do I see people? Do I see them? Do I see each person as a problem to fix? Or do I see people as they're made in God's image, they're imago Dei, and if I disagree with them, or they have a different color of skin or a different culture or background, how do I see them? And what is that doing to my soul? So yeah, I would think to assess, just start there and see what God drills down on in those areas.
As I was kind of going through the writing, one of the things that I noticed in myself was that some of these areas tend to hit harder than others. Like, Amy starts off by saying, you're starved by connection, shame, and humility. And then you're starved for, and she goes through a lot of the different parts of who God is, like King and Justice, Sabbath, like all these different places where God wants to meet us. Now, I'm giving all that backdrop because I'm about to ask Amy a very unfair question.
Okay.
So, Amy, which one of these is the reoccurring theme in your life?
Ooh, yeah. I'll tell you right away. Starved for my identity to be beloved. Here's what's really fun. I didn't realize this for many years, but my name Amy means beloved one.
Oh, wow.
And I needed that in a bad way, because I walked through sexual abuse as a young child. There's been some other things, and I needed to know that my job is literally to just be loved. That's what beloved is, that we would be loved. So I find myself, this will probably be the story until Jesus comes back, that I need to practice being loved, not for what I push or produce out into the world, but that God has bestowed his love upon me, and I receive it not by anything I've done.
It's so fascinating to me. One of the things that I've been studying recently is that I've really come to believe that God's redemptive nature is that on the other side of our wound is our greatest gift. Right. And so your wound is that it's very similar to mine, that I don't feel seen. Right. What I hear you saying is you struggle with your identity. Right. And so then what's your gift? Well, you write a book that sees people's hearts. Right. Like, it's such a fascinating, a fascinating redemptive nature of God's character, right? Like it's so beautiful. But if you're anything like me, then one of the things that's got to be true is that you wrestle with that kind of like vulnerability of when you put a message like this out there. It's almost imposter syndrome, except, intellectually you're like, I give all God all the credit, all the good things in my life come from God. But man, do I feel, kind of vulnerable right now. How do you deal with that? Help me, Pastor.
I'll just jump in the trench. We'll just walk together. I don't know. We're figuring it out as we go. That's a daily. You know what? I honestly think the way you deal with it is you keep coming to God, and he's like, yeah, I wanted you to come to me about this so we could get closer.
Right.
This is your dependence upon me on a daily basis. I know. You know what? Recently, I was really struck by, the famous Paul telling, I have this thorn in my side, and God's, asking 3 times, will you take this away? And I can feel like that, like, God, when will I be okay and fulfilled with who I am in you? Like when, and even watching God say, no, I'm not going to take this thorn, but I'm going to give you 2 things. He says, my grace is enough, and my power is perfected in this weak spot right here. And so just praying, like, God, I feel vulnerable, open to the world, weak. I'm going to count on your grace and power, because those are the two things you said. And boy, you got to show up with those. That's like a regular prayer.
I get the impression that community is a big part of your life and your family's life. Do you have, obviously you live a very public life on the gram, but it's also, appropriately private, right? You're not putting all your family stuff out there.
Right.
How do you nurture intentional community in your circles?
Yes. So our church has done an amazing job of this, and we've had community groups for years. And even with my church recently closing its doors, there's a group of people that said to me, Amy, can we still come to your house on Mondays and have tea and pray and be together? I'm like, yes. Just even thinking whatever the structure is, the community can transcend that. Like our relationships, a church may have closed, but our relationships did not. And I've just really grown to think, I used to buck against like a weekly rhythm of people and community, like, oh, who has time for that? But God has been like, this will be your lifeline. These people, you need to let these people carry you too. This mutuality of carrying one another.
That's so good.
It's been big for me. Yeah.
One of the things I noticed in the book, and you can tell me if I'm crazy, it's fine. That Robbie's, at the end of the book, Robbie, obviously, you guys figure out the rhythm with the Crohn's disease and the food, and you go through this massive cleaning out. And then it's not lost on me that the third day of the diet change is when he was healed. What did you so here's the question I have about that, right? Like, obviously I can read that in hindsight and then be like, oh, it's Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, it's the healing power of Jesus. But did it feel like that in the moment? Take me, that first day that he was without pain, did you realize what had just happened?
I did not. And I even love that you put it that way. Because even right now I'm like, man, when we say he's healed from Crohn's disease, I really felt like God said he's going to have to carry this the rest of his life, but man, he's been in remission from it for 4.5 years, and the diet has been a game changer. When I saw no pain day 3 with this diet, I was thinking, is this forever? Is this gonna last? Like, I didn't have I didn't have 5 years down the road. I thought, will the pain come back tomorrow? Like, is this a reprieve? But the weight started to come back. He started to look healthier and healthier. I was really stunned by what God had done, especially Tony, since when we found the diet, I presented to my husband, I want to try this diet. But our doctors had said, no, you need to try these, like Humira and all these other things, which are heavy hitters under chemotherapy, all the things. And my husband and I butted heads. Like, at one point I stared at him on the back patio, and I was like, I think we need to do the diet. And he's like, you want to go against what the doctor said? And I was like, yes, I do. And I turned on my heel and I went upstairs and I wept, because I was like, you need to get on my page. What? So there was such turmoil in every relationship during this time.
Sure.
Stress was high. And so even thinking, what happened was that my husband started to read articles about the SCD diet and was like, just watching his heart change, like, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's try it for 6 weeks and then see how this works. So when day 3 happened, I was like doing a little party dance on my own. Like, I thought this might work. I didn't have any inside information. I don't know. I just was hoping to try diet first. I'm not anti-meds at all, but so I think God's grace has been super kind. I don't know what the rest of Robbie's trajectory of life will be. I know when stress hits, it hits his stomach. And I think about when he goes off to college, how will this affect his life? And, but man, I count on the faithfulness of God in the past for his future goodness all the time. Yeah,
I love that. Love that. Okay, I have one more question for you. But before I ask it, I know that all of my podcast family is going to want to connect with you all over the interwebs. Where is the best thing to learn about what God is doing in your ministry and what the next book is going to be about? Unless you can give us a teaser right now. But I'm angling. I don't know if you can tell her now, but I'm angling. So where do we learn all things Amy?
If you're going to be on the socials and be social with me, Instagram, just Amy Seiffert on Instagram. Also, amyseiffert.com is being updated all the time too. So you can find me there. I wish I could I have a meeting with my publisher in 3 days. So I wish I could tell you more, but it's coming and It's a book I cannot wait for.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So.
Well, I would love to have you back on the podcast when it comes back out. I would love
it.
Great.
I would love it. You're so good at this.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
I have last question. It's the hardest one I'm going to ask you all day.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice. Except I get to name the season of life that you're in.
Oh, okay.
And so I want to take you back to your very first day on Bowling Green. Right. And Bowling Green has kind of played this interesting role in your life as both like this ministry launching pad and your church home, because that's where your church was. And it's kind of like if there was an epicenter of your ministry timeline, it would be Bowling Green University. Go Falcons.
Yes.
And so if you could go back and talk to that younger version of Amy, at the end of your very first day on campus, and you could sit knee to knee with her, hold her hands, and look her in the eye, that young woman, what's the one thing you're going to tell her about what God has in store?
I would say to 18-year-old Amy in the dorm, Anderson, I would say, wait on the Lord. You don't have to make your life happen. Wait on Him. He's going to shepherd you.
Amen. Amen. That's perfect. Amy, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today and with your heart and what you do to build the kingdom. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you so much for sharing your space with me.